Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling to a place where the sun scorches stone and sand. But the air somehow still smells like rosewater. You're wandering the courtyards of ancient Persia, where empires rose under saffron skies, and people figured out how to stay cool without plugging anything in. Picture it. The year is something like 500 BCE. You're wrapped in layers of soft cotton. There's a faint breeze drifting through a stone archway, and somewhere nearby, someone is grinding dried jasmine petals into a fragrant paste. Now, let's be honest. You probably wouldn't survive this place for more than 10 minutes. Between the heat, the dietary shifts, and the truly questionable plumbing situations, you'd be Googling, return to 21st century, faster than you can say Achaemenid. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Always fun to see how far this sleepy caravan stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the threshold of Persepolis, capital of the mighty Persian Empire. Everything around you whispers of heat, shimmering marble, sun-bleached stone, and the steady creak of wooden doors swaying open to offer brief flashes of cooler air inside. But the surprise is in the air itself. It doesn't just feel dry, it smells nice, floral, spicy, inviting, like someone accidentally spilled an entire perfumery into the breeze. That's not an accident. This is Persia. Here, they don't just cool their homes, they curate the experience. Every breath you take is meant to feel intentional, and in a place where summers can turn your sandals into pancakes, that's no small feat. Historians still argue whether ancient Persia was the first civilization to weaponize fragrance as a means of climate control. But there's no question, they took it very seriously. From perfumed fountains to chilled corridors lined with aromatic tiles, Persian engineers didn't just build cool places. They built places that felt cooler through scent, silence, and slow-moving shade. You step into a caravanserai, a kind of ancient Persian rest stop for weary travelers. The air inside is at least 10 degrees cooler than the sunlit courtyard you just escaped. The walls are thick mud brick, the windows high and narrow, and in the corner someone has hung a soaked linen cloth scented with rosewater over an opening. It flutters in the draft from a vent, part of a system you'll soon learn is way smarter than it looks. You sit. You sip something tangy and sweet. Maybe pomegranate juice, maybe some mysterious herbal infusion meant to keep your inner fire balanced. The man beside you fans himself lazily with a palm frond and nods toward the cloth. "Smells good, right?" he mutters. You nod, trying not to cough on the sudden whiff of cinnamon bark wafting your way. The Persians didn't just stumble upon this. Climate adaptation was baked into their architecture, literally. Their cities were designed with the desert in mind, and cooling wasn't just about temperature, it was sensory. Make it feel fresh, and your brain believes it is. And of course, what better way to feel fresh than with perfume? Perfume in Persia wasn't just for the skin. It was soaked into walls, mixed into water basins, and even painted onto pottery. They crushed herbs, petals, roots, and resins into fine powders or sticky pastes, often stored in alabaster jars or glazed bowls sealed with wax and linen. Some blends were so potent, they could scent an entire room days after being applied. One common trick? Lacing the curtain at your entryway with oil of bitter orange or vetiver, so anyone passing through got a noseful of calm. A mainstream historical fact that often surprises people. Persia may have been one of the first empires to mass-produce and export fragrance. Greek texts speak enviously of the East-scented oils, and fragments of Babylonian tablets suggest that perfumers were part of the royal court staff, right alongside cooks, scribes, and astrologers. But here's a quirkier tidbit. Among the lower classes, people sometimes use stale beer mixed with dried rose petals to scrub themselves down. Supposedly it cooled the body and masked the smell of sun-exhausted skin. Was it effective? Questionable. Was it weirdly popular? Absolutely. And as you sit there slowly sinking into the cool hush of the Persian dusk, you realize something. This isn't just about comfort, it's about control. In a world where the sun dominates, scent was a rebellion, a quiet protest against heat and hardship. A floral whisper that said, "You can't win, son. Not today." Outside, children are chasing each other around a fountain. The water splashes up in lazy arcs and the surface ripples with pink reflections. Some thoughtful court official tossed in a few damask rose petals that morning. You inhale. It smells faintly of citrus and something spicy you can't quite place. Maybe cardamom? You lean back, close your eyes, and imagine this. A civilization so obsessed with keeping cool, they once tried storing snow underground. In the middle of the desert. But that's a tale for another section. For now, breathe deeply. The breeze is perfumed. The air is calm, and you, strangely enough, don't mind the heat. You wander further into the ancient city of Yazd, a place where the desert heat seems to lose its edge. Not through luck, but by design. The streets are narrow, intentionally so, channeling shadows that stretch long and soothing. The walls lean inward, giving the illusion that the city is hugging itself tight, like it knows what you're going through and wants to help you survive it. Above you, something strange juts into the sky. A tower, slim and open at the top, like a chimney, but upside down. You tilt your head and squint. These are badgers or wind catchers. Ingenious, ancient air conditioning systems that look like the love child of a lighthouse in a spice rack. They reach into the sky and scoop the air, channeling it downward into the home below. And sometimes they blow it right over a pool of cold, perfumed water. It's not a breeze exactly, it's a whisper. A hush of air so soft it feels like a polite suggestion. And it smells incredible, that's no accident. In Yazd, people added bowls of dried herbs or a bit of sandalwood smoke near vents, so every draft carried more than just relief. It carried intention. The Persians understood something we forget. Scent is mood. You don't need to drop the temperature 10 degrees if you can convince your body it's already happened. Rosewater in the air, mint underfoot, and a few drops of spikenard in your pillow? You're halfway to thinking it's springtime. Historians still argue whether these wind catchers originated here or were adapted from Egyptian designs. Some say they first appeared in ancient Mesopotamia. Others insist Yazd refined the concept into an art form. Either way, by the time you're climbing onto a flat Persian rooftop for some evening air, they're an essential part of city life. And these towers weren't just plopped onto roofs willy-nilly, they were calibrated. Builders considered wind direction, room orientation, and even humidity. Some structures had multiple towers, each aligned to a specific breeze, like architectural noses sniffing the air for the most comfortable draft. The hot wind is blocked. The cool one gently ushered inside. You duck into a small home, guided by a smiling old man in a linen robe and soft slippers that slap quietly on the tile floor. "Welcome," he says, offering you a bowl of sweet dates soaked in rosewater. "Not too hot today, hmm?" You politely nod, pretending your t-shirt isn't glued to your back. He gestures upward toward the high ceiling, where a shaft of filtered light pours through slits near the roof. "This tower," he says, "is the best part of the house." You listen, really listen. You can hear the wind moving through it. Not howling, but gliding. It's oddly hypnotic. And then, as you take a breath, you realize the scent has changed. Now it's more herbal. A little like dried thyme and wet clay. "My daughter's idea," the man says proudly. "She hangs herbs up there. Lemongrass, lavender, makes the air sweeter." And there it is. Fragrance as function. The tower doesn't just cool, it calms, it resets. You're suddenly not thinking about your aching feet or the heat rash developing somewhere uncomfortable. You're thinking about lavender. You're thinking about how air can carry emotion. A mainstream historical fact. Yazd's wind catchers were so effective, they could lower indoor temperatures by up to 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't a luxury, it was survival tech. Homes weren't cooled with brute force, but with physics, patience, and a little help from Jasmine. But here's the quirk. Wind catchers weren't just for rich households. In Yazd, even modest homes had small versions. And on particularly still days when the breeze couldn't be coaxed, people resorted to scent alone. They'd boil orange peel, burn myrrh, or soak muslin cloths in vinegar and rose essence, then hang them near windows to simulate the sensation of fresh air. Of course, there were moments when that backfired. One tale, likely exaggerated but lovingly repeated, speaks of a nobleman who accidentally mixed his jasmine stash with its medicinal herbs. The result? A dinner party where all the guests felt simultaneously aroused and sleepy, which made for a very confusing poetry reading. You move into the central courtyard where the heart of the house quietly beats. A rectangular pool shimmers in the center, surrounded by potted basil and small citrus trees. This pool isn't just for aesthetics, it's part of the cooling system. Air from the wind catcher is guided over the water before entering the living spaces, like a breath inhaled over ice. As you dip your fingers in, the water feels impossibly cool. Someone must have added rose essence this morning. It clings to your skin like a polite ghost. Your host gestures toward a jug resting on the windowsill. Smell it, he suggests. You do. It's full of mint and cucumber floating in slightly cloudy water. Keeps the air clean, he explains, and keeps the mood quiet. Mood, that's the word again. In this world, climate is emotional. A breeze isn't just a breeze, it's a balm. A scent isn't just decoration, it's an architectural tool. And so you sit there under the open sky, the wind catcher humming above you like a sleepy flute. The scent of basil rising with the dusk, and you think, maybe we've overcomplicated things. Maybe a chilled soda and a ceiling fan can't compete with wind, water, and one perfectly placed sprig of rosemary. You rise from the tiled bench and follow a quiet hallway lined with faded frescoes and tiny niches where bowls of dried rose petals rest like offerings. The scent is gentle, not overwhelming, a trace of yesterday's bloom, caught in the stillness of air. You turn a corner and enter a larger space, cool and shaded, where light filters in through a mashrabiyah screen in lace-like patterns. This is the Underuni, the inner sanctum of the home, and the temperature drop is immediate. The trick here isn't just architectural, it's hydrological, aromatic, and psychological all at once. At the center of the room, you spot another basin, smaller this time, but clearly maintained with care. The water is still, save for a tiny ripple every few seconds, caused not by breeze, but by the gentle drip of a clay spout above. And in the water float orange blossoms and crushed mint, curling like little boats on a fragrant lake. This is the Persian courtyard system in action. Scent meets breeze, meets silence, meets design. A perfect recipe for a nap. You settle beside the basin and your host gestures toward the walls. Embedded in the thick plaster are small vents, some high, some low. Each was carefully placed to funnel air across specific spaces. The effect? A subtle cross draft, like an invisible cat brushing past your ankles. And all of this, the courtyard, the water, the aromas, works together to simulate an illusion that the desert heat isn't just tolerable, but enjoyable. Scent isn't an afterthought. It's part of the cooling circuit. Mainstream historical fact? Many Persian homes were built around these courtyards with hows, those pools of water, specifically to drop perceived temperatures. Combined with shade and strategic ventilation, it could reduce the felt heat dramatically, even if the thermometer didn't budge. But here's a detail that's more off the beaten scroll. In elite homes, it wasn't uncommon to float spices like cardamom or cloves in the pools, believed not only to scent the air, but to flavor the mood for visitors. Historians still argue whether this practice had medical roots or was just one of those ancient hospitality quirks, like serving tea so hot it becomes a personality test. The effect, however, is clear. You breathe more slowly. Your skin prickles with a phantom chill. The smell of the mint basin merges with a trailing note of frankincense drifting from the next room. Someone lit a piece of resin on charcoal, probably more for mood than sanctity. It mingles with sunlight and settles into your clothes. Your host reappears, now holding a small porcelain bottle. He uncorks it and waves the opening near you. The smell, pure damask rose. Sweet, deep, a little melancholic. Imported, he murmurs. From Shiraz. You're not sure what response is expected, so you just nod slowly, eyes a little glassy. Nice. He laughs. You'll sleep like a prince tonight. That's the thing about scent. It clings not just to skin, but to memory. And here in Persia, memories are designed to be fragrant. There are entire recipes for sleep that involve layering aromas. Sandalwood on the curtains, crushed mint under the bed, a dab of rose oil on the temples. Not for luxury, but for serenity. Remember that wind catcher from earlier? Some clever households added bowls of perfumed water right beneath its vents, so the incoming breeze passed over the surface and carried the scent through the home. Your basic swamp cooler, but make it poetry. You can almost imagine the mother of the house checking the bowls every morning, replacing wilted petals, adjusting the mint, muttering about someone letting the cloves sit too long and turning the air spicy instead of sacred. And in public spaces, like baths, libraries, or even bazaars, the idea was the same. Courtyards offered pools or fountains, and smart merchants or architects added fresh herbs or scented cloths nearby. One ancient text refers to a scholar complaining that the scent of onions has overtaken the poetry, suggesting that air quality and scent hierarchy were apparently a scholarly battleground. As the afternoon light fades, you find yourself growing drowsy. Everything about this space is designed to lull you. The temperature hasn't dropped much, but the scent, the shade, and the slow rhythm of water, they work together to convince your body it's time to rest. You lie back on a cushioned bench, the air still holding that faint mint orange note. Somewhere a wooden screen creaks gently, and you hear a jug being filled. Slow, rhythmic, like an ASMR loop from 500 BCE. And just when you think you've soaked in all the clever cooling hacks of this place, your host returns with a tiny fan, handheld, made of thin reeds. He waves it slowly, not toward your face, but toward the bowl of water beside you. It stirs the surface, sends a ripple through the petals, and the breeze it generates carries a fresh whisper of rose and thyme. You exhale. You're not sure what time it is, it doesn't matter. This is Persia, where time, like wind, moves gently, and always smells better than you expect. The next morning, if you can call it that, because in this kind of place the day sort of tiptoes in rather than barging through, you wake to the sound of dripping water. Not sharp or urgent, just a slow pat, echoing off cool stone. Somewhere a pair of doves are cooing like they have a gossip column to run. And the air, still scented, still cool, still wrapped in mint and orange blossom like a politely persistent hug. Your host is already awake, kneeling beside what appears to be a low, narrow tunnel in the floor. At first glance, it looks like a forgotten storage space. But then he gestures for you to come closer, and when you crouch beside him, you feel it. A breeze rising from below, moist and scented with something earthy and deep. It's cooler down there. Much cooler. Welcome to the Qanat, a marvel of ancient Persian engineering that brought water from the mountains straight into the hearts of cities, homes, gardens, and courtyards. Not by magic, not by pipes, by patience, gravity, and an almost ridiculous willingness to dig very, very long holes. Qanats are underground channels, sloping gently from an upland aquifer to the towns below. Think of them as ancient subterranean aqueducts, and because they run below ground, the water they carry stays cold, perfect for drinking, irrigating, or cooling the air in buildings like the one you're in. Mainstream historical fact. Qanats could stretch for miles. Some extended more than 70 kilometers, and the only sign on the surface was a dotted line of vertical shafts used by builders to remove soil during construction and for later maintenance. In fact, if you were flying over ancient Persia, with your time-traveling hot air balloon, you'd see lines of little holes trailing across the desert like a very determined mole had gone sightseeing. But the best part? These weren't just utilities, they were sacred. In Zoroastrianism, clean, flowing water was considered holy, and the act of building a Qanat wasn't just engineering, it was a spiritual duty. The person who dug it got to use the water first, but also gained serious moral brownie points, like earning spiritual hydration credits. Your host explains this while dipping a clay cup into the shallow stream just visible through the grate. The water smells faintly of clay, fennel, and stone. It's not artificially perfumed, but the air around it is. Nearby, someone has hung dried basil and wormwood to mask any musty scent. Even underground, they're curating the vibe. Now here's the quirky bit. In some homes, especially wealthier ones, these Qanats weren't just for water, they were air chillers too. Builders figured out that if you drew warm air over the surface of the Qanat water, it would cool before entering the house. Some systems even pulled the air through perfumed chambers, like early HVAC filters with a flair for florals. Historians still argue whether the scenting of Qanat-cooled air was common practice or more of a palace-level indulgence. But the blueprints remain. Air shafts, Qanat access, and narrow hallways that double as scent corridors. A 3-in-1 miracle of engineering, fragrance, and, well, vibes. You follow your host through one of those very hallways. It's narrow with low light and walls built from a mix of brick and polished plaster. The air is noticeably cooler, not in-your-face cool, but the kind of refreshing you notice only when you stop walking and realize you're not sweating anymore. Along the walls, shelves hold small ceramic bowls, some empty, some filled with dried herbs, petals, or what looks suspiciously like lavender-infused salt. Scent chambers, your host explains. They change them out every few days, depending on mood. Or guess? Guests get their own smell, you ask. He shrugs. It's polite. You're beginning to realize something. In Persia, comfort wasn't just environmental, it was performative. You don't just be cool, you show that you care enough to make coolness an experience. It's part of your hospitality resume. Right under serves dates with both hands and doesn't let the pomegranate seeds fall on the carpet. As you emerge from the hallway into a deeper chamber, probably some kind of reception room, you hear a soft plink plink. Overhead, a thin copper tube drips water onto a carved stone slab, which trickles into a runnel below. The water has been lightly scented, probably rose again, and the sound it makes is surprisingly musical. Your host smiles. Music for the air. It's one of those offbeat moments where history feels like poetry. Here's a people who mastered water in the desert, chilled their homes without fans, and still had time to ask, but what should the air sound like? And there's that poetic paradox again. Persia, in its blazing heat, created spaces that trick you into thinking about snow. It wasn't just about reducing temperature, it was about controlling perception. You feel cooler not because the room is icy, but because it whispers calm, because the shadows stretch just right, because the air smells faintly of lemon balm and the water drips in rhythm with your breath. You sit for a moment longer, letting the breeze from the Qanat swirl past your ankles. Someone passes by carrying a bundle of fresh mint, the stems wrapped in wet cloth to keep them cool. A waft of sharp green follows in their wake, and you think, oddly, that you've never felt so luxuriously relaxed in a basement. You emerge from the cooled inner chamber into the sunlit courtyard again, blinking as the brightness washes over you like a too early morning alarm. The air outside hums with heat, but somehow it doesn't hit you as hard anymore. Maybe it's the rosewater lingering in your nostrils, or the slow rhythm of that Qanat drip still echoing in your chest. Or maybe you're finally adjusting to the Persian way of cooling off. You don't fight the heat, you outwit it. Your host gestures toward a garden gate and says simply, "Paradise." You chuckle, assuming it's a metaphor. It's not. Stepping through the archway, you find yourself in a chahar bag, a traditional Persian garden divided into 4 quadrants by walkways and flowing water channels. And yes, it's pretty close to paradise. The sun is filtered through a canopy of pomegranate and plane trees. The water flows gently underfoot. The scent is a tapestry: fresh-cut basil, ripe figs, and the faintest note of jasmine floating from a shaded corner. You sit on a low stone bench and let your eyes wander. In one quadrant, a gardener plucks dead petals from a bed of marigolds. In another, children run past a fig tree with juice-stained fingers. Overhead, birds chirp like they've got somewhere better to be but don't want to miss the gossip. And in the center, a pool of still water, ringed with tiles so blue they make the sky look insecure. This isn't just a garden, it's an ecosystem of calm. Designed to cool the body, soothe the mind, and humble the soul. Mainstream historical fact: Persian gardens were more than just nice places to stroll. They were built with careful geometry and hydrology in mind. Water flowed in from Qanats, cooling the ground and circulating through channels that created tiny microclimates. Some studies show that temperatures near these garden pools could be noticeably lower than in nearby open plazas. But there's something else, something more sensory at play. These gardens didn't just work through shade and evaporation. They used scent as insulation. Rows of herbs, basil, mint, lavender, even fenugreek, were planted in lines specifically to perfume the air. The idea was simple: if the breeze must pass through something, let it pass through beauty. One fringe tidbit that always catches historians off guard: some nobles imported night-blooming flowers solely to cool the evenings aromatically. These would release their strongest scents at dusk, when the heat hadn't yet fully lifted but the mind was ready to unwind. Essentially, nighttime aromatherapy, 2,500 years ahead of the spa industry. You wander the path in soft sandals, the stones still warm beneath your feet, but not burning. A gardener waves to you from under an arbor of grapes, his hand stained green with crushed mint. He's just replaced a row of basil. Too old, he says with a grin. It smelled like soup. You chuckle, only half understanding, and sit beside a small, trickling fountain. Your host joins you and offers a small cloth pouch. Inside, dried rose petals, crushed bay leaf, and a pinch of saffron. For your pocket, he explains, in case the city smells too much like donkey. A fair concern, but here, in the garden, the air is untouched. No smoke, no sweat, no spice merchants shouting. Just a long exhale of plants doing their best impersonation of a lullaby. Historians still argue whether the gardens were designed with sleep in mind, or if it's just a modern romantic projection. But there's evidence. Some royal gardens had shaded pavilions specifically for napping, with domed ceilings that amplified birdsong and stone benches cooled by channels running underneath. Imagine snoozing while lavender blooms sigh in the breeze beside you, and a slow stream murmurs like a lullaby. Yeah, sleep was probably part of the plan. You rest under a cypress tree, watching the breeze nudge a thin ribbon of white smoke from a coil of incense someone lit near the fountain. It's not for prayer, it's for vibe. The scent is cedarwood, earthy, warm, grounding. And there it is again, that Persian layering of elements. Water to cool, trees to shade, flowers to scent, sound to soothe. All working together in this intricate choreography of not dying from heat stroke but looking really elegant while avoiding it. You lean back, eyes half closed, and remember that in Persian the word for paradise literally derives from their word for enclosed garden. Paradisa. It became paradise in Greek, Latin, and eventually English. Which means technically this isn't just a paradise. It's the paradise. The original. You breathe deep. The air tastes green, soft, and faintly floral. A light breeze slips past your ear and you swear it's whispering. Stay a while. You don't argue. You're lying under the gentle shade of a fig tree now. The kind of tree that understands patience. Its branches stretch just wide enough to filter the light, and a breeze passes lazily through, stirring the scent of ripened fruit and something more delicate, like sandalwood maybe, or clove. Somewhere in the garden, you hear the faint clatter of dishes and the clink of glass. Tea is being served. You follow the sound into a pavilion, ringed with open arches and silk curtains that billow like slow thoughts. This is the reception space, the divan khane where guests are entertained, gossip is exchanged, and tea is drunk with the seriousness of a philosophical debate. And like everything else in Persia, even the social rituals are laced with scent. Your host is back, seated cross-legged on a low cushion, surrounded by other guests. The air here is noticeably heavier with fragrance. Incense burns quietly in a corner, something resinous and woodsy, maybe oud, and bowls of crushed herbs line the outer edge of the platform. It's not just decorative, every whiff has a purpose. Tea? Your host asks, lifting a tiny glass cup of amber liquid. With rosewater, good for heat and heartbreak. You take a sip. It's sweet, floral, and surprisingly cooling. This is where you begin to understand that fragrance in Persia was more than comfort. It was culture. A coded language. An unspoken status symbol. Mainstream historical fact. The Persian royal courts were known for their obsession with fragrance. Rosewater was practically a national treasure. Produced in vast quantities, stored in copper stills, and gifted to foreign dignitaries as a symbol of refinement. During the Sasanian Empire, elaborate rituals involved anointing guests with scented oils or waving censers filled with burning myrrh and frankincense in their path as a gesture of honor. But in the later dynasties, especially under the Safavids, things escalated to full-on olfactory theater. Guests weren't just offered tea, they were offered experiences. Servers would discreetly adjust the room's scent based on the mood. Something calming if tensions were high. Something invigorating if the conversation lagged. Imagine being subtly spritzed with motivation mid-conversation. Now, here's a delightful fringe detail. Some nobles hired scent keepers, men who were essentially butlers of fragrance. Their job? Maintain the room's aroma like a DJ maintains a dance floor. Too much rose? Balance it with citrus peel. Guest fainting from heat? Splash a little vinegar of violets on a nearby wall. Not enough intrigue in the air? Burn a hint of cinnamon and clove. Mood restored. Historians still argue whether these scent rituals were genuinely therapeutic or just extremely extra. Some believe they had roots in ancient medical theories about balancing the humors. Others think it was just a fancy way of saying, "You smell that? That's money." You shift on your cushion and notice a small burner beside your seat. It's terracotta, painted with simple vines, and inside it smolders a pinch of frankincense. Not enough to dominate the space, just enough to mark your corner of the room. You're suddenly aware that every guest seems to have their own scent zone. The older woman across from you smells faintly of saffron. The man to your left, something sharp, bay leaves, maybe even hyssop. Your host explains, it's a matter of respect. Everyone deserves their own air. You'd laugh, but you can't tell if he's joking or just Persian. The conversation turns to poetry, as it often does in these parts. A guest recites a verse by Hafez, his voice smooth as rose oil. I have learned to smell the dust of your path sweeter than musk. Everyone nods. Someone sighs. Another burner is lit. You begin to notice how every scent signals a shift. Cardamom enters the room. Time for dessert. The incense dies down. Someone's about to leave. A young boy enters with a bowl of lemons and basil. We're recharging the air. And through all of this, the air stays cool. Not icy, but chill in a way that makes your skin forget the desert. The shaded arches funnel the breeze, the silk curtains catch it like sails, and every corner of the room offers something fragrant to your lungs. You realize, almost with surprise, that you haven't thought about the heat in over an hour. You glance toward the far end of the pavilion where a small table holds rows of glass bottles. Rose, orange blossom, lavender, clove, lemon peel, even a strange one that smells like fresh earth after rain. They aren't for display, they're for tuning the room. Your host raises his cup. To cooling the soul, he says, and you raise yours too, thinking about how in this empire of sun and sand, they built their defense not with stone or shade, but with stories, scent, and a remarkable understanding that sometimes, to change the world, you start by changing the air around you. Later, after too much tea and just the right amount of saffron sweets, you find yourself drawn by the sound of chanting. Low, rhythmic, and drifting on the wind like incense. You follow it through a quieter courtyard, this one shaded by tall cypresses and lined with narrow channels of flowing water that glitter faintly under the moonlight. The breeze here feels different. Sharper, more deliberate, and as you step closer, you realize it carries something unexpected. The scent of cedar, bitter herbs, and myrrh. You're nearing a fire temple. In Zoroastrian Persia, places of worship weren't meant to impress with towering spires or echoing vaults. They were spaces of elemental balance, earth, water, fire, and air, all carefully honored. And just as scent was woven into daily life, it played a powerful role in the sacred too. You're invited in gently by a priest in pale robes who gestures for you to remove your shoes and cover your head. Inside, the chamber is quiet. Fire crackles in a stone brazier at the center, low but steady, its smoke rising in a thin ribbon toward an open ceiling. The walls are simple. Whitewashed stone, some painted with floral patterns, others left bare. What fills the room isn't sight but smell. Mainstream historical fact. Zoroastrians use specific incense blends and rituals, believing scent connected the material world to the divine. The fire represented truth and purity. The aroma carried prayers upward. Scent wasn't just a sensory detail, it was a form of communication. That's where the story turns from mainstream to mystical. Some ancient texts suggest that priests were trained not just to recite scripture, but to compose scent blends for particular rituals. There were recipes for weddings, funerals, seasonal rites, even for moments of personal doubt. Think of it as aromatherapy meets theology. You sit on a cool stone bench, eyes closed, and listen. The chanting continues slow and spiraling, while a nearby attendant carefully places a pinch of something onto the coals. A sweet, almost honeyed scent rises, likely storax or perhaps labdanum, harvested from Mediterranean shrubs and traded for silk and horses. The smoke curls lazily across the ceiling and drifts down toward you. It doesn't sting your eyes. It hangs like memory. Somewhere in the corner, someone adds sandalwood chips to a dish of rosewater, letting them soak overnight to soften the burn. The room begins to smell like the past trying to remember itself. Historians still argue whether this kind of scent alchemy was more widespread or restricted to elite temples. Some say it was universal, accessible to every firekeeper and family. Others insist it was a priestly privilege, a closely guarded art passed down through smell rather than script. But here's a fringe detail you didn't expect. In some shrines, nose hierarchies existed. Senior priests got first whiff of sacred blends, while junior initiates were assigned less fragrant tasks, like fanning the coals or rehydrating the herbs. One particularly salty chronicle from the 11th century grumbles that the youngest priest smelled only smoke and onions. Rough start to spiritual enlightenment. You stay seated, letting the scent settle. It doesn't overpower, it lingers. Like a song that forgets its chorus, but remembers how to make you hum along anyway. The air shifts again. Someone opens a carved wooden shutter high on the wall, and a gentle draft rolls in. You can smell the contrast. Outside, dry dust and jasmine. Inside, fire and resin, the meeting of worlds. The priest returns with a bowl and offers it to you. Inside, crushed herbs, mostly basil, thyme, and something peppery. For thought, he says. You press your hands above it and inhale. It smells like green shadows and warm stones. A reminder that even here, in the sacred, a breeze must be carefully curated. There is no neutral air in Persia. Every breath is a message. You thank him softly and make your way out as the chants fade. Outside, the sky has gone deep navy and the stars look like they're exhaling. The night air is cooler now, not just in temperature, but in tone. The desert has learned momentarily to hush. As you walk back through the cypress-lined courtyard, you pass a bowl resting near a doorway. It's filled with water, floating marigold blossoms, and a few drops of oil. It's meant for guests, a final scent before sleep. You lean close. It smells like home, even if it isn't. Morning again. Though in Persia, mornings feel more like a rumor than a reality. The sun rises slowly with a kind of dramatic hesitation, spilling pale gold across domes and courtyards. You're woken not by sound, but scent. Something sweet, something musky, something distinctly camelish. You crack one eye open and there it is. A small caravan assembling outside the garden gate. Men in layered robes are loading saddlebags onto the gentle humps of camels who look, quite frankly, like they've seen too much and are done pretending to care. But what's surprising isn't the camels or the chaos, it's the smell. That odd mixture of sun-warmed leather, dried dates, spice, and yes, a whiff of what can only be described as musky wisdom. One of the handlers waves at you and grins. Heading to the spice road, he says. Want to see what the desert really smells like? Naturally, you follow. The caravan sets off in no hurry at all. The sun hasn't climbed far, and already the heat feels like a decision you weren't consulted on. But you're given a place near the front and a small bundle of cloth to press over your nose. Not to block scent, but to temper it. Because out here, every breeze brings something new. Mainstream historical fact. The Persian section of the Silk Roads was a bustling corridor of trade, not just for silk and porcelain, but for scent. Aromatics like frankincense, myrrh, musk, saffron, cinnamon, and spikenard flowed through the empire like invisible currency. These weren't just luxuries, they were staples, used in medicine, ritual, love spells, and naturally perfumed cooling systems. But here's a more offbeat detail. Camel caravans themselves were sometimes used as mobile scent diffusers. No, really. Traders rubbed down their saddles and cloth wraps with diluted rose oil or mint essence. Not to match the animals necessarily, but to mingle with the desert wind. This created a sort of perfumed plume trailing the caravan, like a slow-moving air freshener powered by very moody beasts. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or a high-class merchant quirk. Some accounts claim it helped keep insects away. Others suggest it was psychological, convincing travelers that the road was more bearable if it smelled a little like a garden. It's also possible that rubbing saffron into camel fur before entering a city was a way to flex. After all, nothing says, "I'm rich," like a glowing yellow camel. You ride through a narrow pass where the rocks seem to lean in, casting welcome shadows. The air shifts, cooler here, and touched with the scent of crushed sagebrush. The trader beside you points to a leather pouch hanging from the lead camel's saddle. "That's the musk," he says with a wink. You nod, pretending to understand. Musk, as you'll soon learn, was a highly prized and hotly debated ingredient in ancient perfumery. It originally came from glands of the male musk deer found in Central Asia. But in Persia, musk had many sources: animal, plant, and even artificial concoctions brewed from mysterious mixtures of ambergris, tree resins, and fermented herbs. What you're smelling now? Unclear, but it's strong enough to make your camel sneeze. As the caravan stops to rest near a palm grove, a few traders open up their bundles. Rolls of dried herbs, trays of saffron thread so vivid they seem lit from within, and stacks of neatly packed rose petals pressed into cakes. One man unwraps a pouch of something earthy and sweet-smelling. "This," he says proudly, "is desert myrrh. Aged 2 summers. You lean in. It smells ancient, like sun-baked stone, pepper, and something you can't quite name. Like memory itself. You ask what it's used for." He shrugs. "Perfume, medicine, trade. And once," he adds, "we soaked it in oil, hung it by the windcatcher vent, and let the breeze take it through the whole house." You blink. It's not a metaphor. That's a literal air conditioning strategy. Again, powered by nothing but smart design and better smell. Another man hands you a sliver of hardened resin. "Chew it," he says. "Good for breath, good for sleep." You try. It's intense, like sucking on a spicy tree. By midday, the caravan has made camp in the shadow of a ruined watchtower. Tents are pitched, water poured over blankets to cool the air beneath them, and small burners are lit. Not for heat, but for atmosphere. The smoke curls up, scented with crushed basil and dried citrus peel. The camels grunt their approval. Or disapproval. Hard to tell with camels. Here's a delightful fringe tidbit. Some Persian traders use scent not only to entice buyers, but to signal identity. Certain spice merchants from the eastern provinces were known by the unique blend of oils they wore. It was a calling card, a perfumed handshake. Others claim to use scent as a warning. "If you smell vinegar and burnt cloves," one tale goes, "leave the deal." The man lies. You lie back under the tent, the fabric above you gently swaying in the breeze. A small pouch of dried thyme and mint hangs from a rope, swinging just enough to keep the air herbal. The sun outside is merciless, but here in your slice of shade, you feel strangely safe. The desert, it turns out, has its own perfume. Dust, sweat, spice, and yes, camel, but also basil, rose, and the quiet dignity of people who know how to turn even the wind into something worth smelling. The sun outside is still blazing, but inside your bones there's calm. You smell like a garden that just rained. You feel like silk that forgot to wrinkle. And you think to yourself, if this is how Persia cooled off, maybe the real luxury wasn't water or walls, it was care. The sun outside is still blazing, but inside your bones there's calm. You smell like a garden that just rained. You feel like silk that forgot to wrinkle. And you think to yourself, if this is how Persia cooled off, maybe the real luxury wasn't water or walls, it was care. Evening again? The sky is deepening to that classic Persian blue, somewhere between sapphire and secret, and the air carries a different energy. Slower, sleepier, more scented somehow. You're walking the streets now, wrapped in loose, freshly bathed layers that still smell faintly of violet paste and orange blossom. You pass by open courtyards where people sip tea and fan themselves lazily with palm fronds, talking in low voices. Laughter bubbles out of doorways, lanterns flicker. But what really pulls your attention now are the walls. Specifically the ones made from a type of limestone that seems to breathe with the night. You step into a modest home, one of the older structures, not royal, but cleverly built, and your host greets you with a proud gesture toward the walls. "It's not just rock," he says, knocking softly. "It remembers." You raise an eyebrow. He smiles. "Watch." He pours a thin stream of water, infused with jasmine and a touch of vinegar, down a groove in the wall. The stone darkens as it drinks, then begins to exhale. Not steam, not mist. Cool air, lightly perfumed, rising from the surface like the sigh of a well-rested ghost. Mainstream historical fact. Many Persian homes were constructed using thick limestone blocks, clay-coated bricks, or a mixture of mud and crushed marble. These materials held on to coolness during the night and released it slowly during the heat of the day. It's a bit like sleeping on a stone that knows your body temperature better than you do. But here's the aromatic twist. Clever homeowners would soak certain sections of the walls with scented water during the evening. As the night air cooled, the walls absorbed both the temperature and the scent. By the time day returned, the rooms exhaled not just coolness, but calmness. A slow perfume that gently unfurled over hours. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or limited to households with money and time to experiment. But there are enough descriptions in medieval Persian poetry to suggest the practice was at least admired, if not copied. One famous couplet refers to a wall that weeps rose at dawn and whispers musk by noon. Tonight, your host has prepared a blend of jasmine, basil, and rosewater, a classic. He ladles the mixture into small stone basins carved along the base of the wall. "We'll let gravity do the rest," he says, "and tomorrow you'll wake up feeling like silk." You walk over to one of the cooler corners where the scent is strongest. It's subtle but insistent. The wall is dry to the touch, but your fingers come away faintly perfumed. The air around you seems to shimmer as if the space itself is sighing with relief. Another quirk? In some regions, people carved tiny channels into the surface of walls, barely visible grooves, so that scented water could be guided in artistic patterns. These weren't just practical, they were beautiful. Swirling vines, geometric stars, and floral shapes that soaked in scent and released it over time like an aromatic slow drip painting. You settle onto a pile of cushions set by the perfumed wall. Someone brings a small clay burner with glowing coals and drops a pinch of something onto it. The scent is unfamiliar, smoky, and a little sweet. Your host grins. "Ambergris," he says, lowering his voice as if he's letting you in on a smuggler's secret. "Whale treasure?" "Ah yes, ambergris, a rare waxy substance formed in the digestive system of sperm whales. Washed ashore, gathered by lucky beachcombers, and sold for perfume making at prices that would make gold blush. In Persia, it was revered, traded, and sometimes eaten in tiny medicinal doses. But mostly, it was burned in rooms like this to make people feel important and sleepy. Your host waves the burner gently, letting the smoke drift toward the cooling wall. The air thickens, lush with fragrance. Jasmine from the stone, ambergris from the burner, basil from the floor. Your senses are wrapped in it now, folded gently into a soft cocoon of scent and stone. And here's the fringe fact for tonight. Some believed the stone itself retained emotional energy from the scents it absorbed. Certain walls were reserved only for rosewater, others only for sandalwood. Families passed down recipes like heirlooms. This ratio for spring, this one for grief, this one for the night before your wedding. It was perfumed architecture with a memory. You lean back, eyes fluttering shut as the wall behind you radiates coolness into your bones. The scent is not strong, it's just there. Like a friend who doesn't need to speak to be comforting. Outside, someone is playing a reed flute. Inside, your breath has slowed to match the rhythm of a home that cools you not with ice, but with intention. You're beginning to see what Persia knew all along. You don't need machines when you have air that listens, walls that remember, and perfume that carries the story of your day all the way into your dreams. The moon is high now, a silver coin pressed into the deep blue fabric of the sky, and you find yourself lying beneath a vaulted ceiling so intricately designed it might as well have been stitched from geometry itself. You're inside what your host proudly calls the summer room, a space built low, shaded on all sides, and crowned with a ceiling engineered to trap heat, redirect air, and somehow still smell like rosewater on a good day. The air is still, but not dead. It breathes, rising and falling like the quiet exhale of someone napping. And as you lie there, the ceiling starts to make sense. Every arch, every hollow niche, every patterned cut in the plaster plays a role. It's more than decoration. It's science with a flair for style. Mainstream historical fact. Persian architects mastered passive cooling centuries before the modern fan. Vaulted ceilings, often in the form of muqarnas, those honeycomb-like domes, weren't just beautiful, they helped circulate and trap heat in the upper parts of the room. Hot air rises, and when the ceiling is high and layered, and it stays there. Meanwhile, cooler air, sometimes scented, is drawn in low, right where you're lounging now. But here's where things get even more elegant. These ceilings were sometimes designed with hidden air channels, narrow shafts that connected to wind catchers or corridors. As breezes passed through the structure, they moved silently overhead, carrying scent from one room to another. It's a little like an ancient air freshener whispering its way across the ceiling. Your host points upward. This one pulls in air from the east tower, he says, grinning. In the morning, it smells like citrus. You believe him. Tonight, the scent is softer. Rosewater mostly, with a trace of chamomile and something earthy like dried mint or cedar shavings. It's subtle. A background note that you only notice when you forget to think. Then there's the sound. Not much. Just the occasional creak of the wood, the shifting of fabric as the breeze nudges a curtain, and that ever-present whisper of air moving through ancient stone. And, true to Persian form, the scent isn't left to chance. On one side of the room, set carefully into the wall, is a fragrance recess, a small niche lined with glazed tile, meant to hold bowls of perfumed water or fresh herbs. Tonight's offering? Crushed basil floating in rose oil, with a single clove bobbing like it's doing a victory lap. You lean in. It's just enough to reset your entire nervous system. Here's a quirky footnote. Some ceilings were painted not just for beauty, but for coolness psychology. Pale blues, greens, and even golds reflected soft light and, combined with scent and airflow, convinced your brain you were somewhere cooler than you really were. Persian Mind Games, Architectural Edition. Historians still argue whether ceiling color and scent pairing was a formal design rule or just the kind of thing passed between builders over tea and dried figs. But we know this. Recipes existed. A room painted sky blue, best with mint and lime peel. A gold leaf dome, pair with rose and saffron. One medieval manual even suggests lavender scent with green vaults for easing dreams. Dreams, yes. You're drifting again? A servant glides into the room, silent as a memory, and places a small pouch near your head. It's filled with dried herbs, mostly lavender, lemon balm, and a sprig of rue. For breath, she murmurs, and disappears. You take it in your hand, it's warm from her touch. You squeeze it gently and the scent rises, herbal, floral, a little medicinal, but grounding. It's not overpowering, it's just a signal to your body. Everything is fine. This room was never meant to be loud. It was meant to be felt. A space where heat and noise are gently sifted away by curves, shadows, and the barely there perfume of the earth remembering to be kind. You look up at the ceiling again. The patterns begin to blur. The geometry softens into dreams. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls once. Then nothing. You're not asleep yet, but you are no longer awake in the way the world demands. The air brushes your cheek like silk. The wall behind you hums with faint coolness. And the ceiling above waits patiently to gather your heat, tuck it into its corners, and replace it with air that smells like a lullaby. You're not sure what hour it is now, only that time has stopped announcing itself. The city beyond these walls has fallen quiet. The garden is hushed, and even the wind catchers, those tireless sentinels of the breeze, seem to be sleeping. But something stirs inside the summer room. Your host appears at the threshold holding a small tray. No lamps, no fanfare. Just a clay flask of cool water, a dish of almonds and honey, and a single rose. You sit up, blinking. Midnight snack? You murmur. He smirks. Midnight story. And he tells you a tale. Or maybe it tells itself. It begins with a flower, a rose, of course. In the royal gardens of Ctesiphon, capital of the Sasanian Empire, an entire palace wing once overflowed with damask rose bushes. Their petals were collected at dawn by women with baskets and quiet hands. The petals were then steamed in copper stills, The vapor condensed into rosewater so pure it was said to carry dreams. This water wasn't just splashed onto bedsheets or sipped in tea. Oh no. According to one version of the story, it was weaponized. Mainstream historical fact. Rosewater was indeed a status symbol and export product in ancient Persia, used in rituals, medicine, and yes, courtly politics. The scent of rose became associated with purity, refinement, and power. But here's the twist your host relishes. A perfume assassin. The story goes that a young servant, trained in the art of scent, infiltrated the harem of a jealous queen. Every night she was tasked with preparing rose-scented linens for the royal bedchamber. But instead of rose, she began to layer in other notes, dangerous ones. Sweet basil to sharpen the nerves, clove to heat the blood, and finally a drop of something rare, bitter almond oil, faintly laced with poison. Whether the queen succumbed to the scent or merely slipped on a bar of soap depends on who's telling the story. But one version insists she died smiling. She thought it was the best night's sleep of her life, your host says with a wink. Historians still argue whether this tale is apocryphal, symbolic, or just the result of someone overdoing it with bedtime aromatherapy. But it captures something very Persian. The idea that scent can seduce, soothe, and destroy, all in the same breath. You sip the cool water and trace your finger along the petal of the rose on your tray. It's not threatening, it's just honest. Fragrance doesn't lie. It says exactly what it is, even if you can't name it. Your host shares another strange tidbit. In some courtly circles, scent was so tightly woven with politics that royals used smell testers, trusted servants who could detect even subtle changes in the air, like a note of saffron where mint should be, or the sudden arrival of burnt orange peel during a tense negotiation. A scent out of place was a whisper of sabotage. And yet, even with this constant awareness, people still chose to surround themselves with fragrance. Why? Because to live in Persia without scent was unthinkable. To sweat without rosewater, to bathe without basil, to sleep without lavender. That was considered a form of spiritual neglect. You lean back against the cool wall again, thinking about how your own night has been shaped, how every moment since sundown has been carried not on noise or color, but on the invisible fabric of aroma. And in this stillness, your host leans in and murmurs the end of the tale. The girl who poisoned the queen fled into the desert. They say she carried only a pouch of cloves and a vial of rose. Wherever she went, people followed the scent. Some to find her, others to dream like she did. You smile, a little drowsy. And did they find her? He shrugs. Hard to say, but sometimes when the wind is right, the desert still smells like her. Outside, the night wind shifts, gentle and cool, brushing past your face like a hand through water. Somewhere, a lantern flickers. A curtain sighs, and the room fills once more with the soft, unmistakable perfume of rose. You wake to the gentle creak of wooden shutters swinging open, and a pale ribbon of early morning light stretching across the cool tile floor like a cat returning home. The air has changed again. It's cooler now, kissed with something familiar. Snow? No. Not quite. But you sit up and sniff the breeze. Saffron. And something cold. Your host appears with a sly grin and gestures for you to follow. Come, he says. You've smelled the wind. Now taste it. You throw on a loose robe and padded slippers, and follow him through the courtyard, now fresh with dew. In one corner, hidden behind thick cypress hedges, you find something unexpected. A yakchal, an ancient Persian ice house. It looks like a massive dome rising from the earth, part beehive, part spaceship. Made of mud brick and mortar mixed with ash, lime, and goat hair, this structure doesn't look like it should contain ice in the middle of a desert. But it does. Mainstream historical fact. Yakchals were ingenious refrigeration systems that dated back to as early as 400 BCE. Using thick walls, subterranean insulation, and the principles of evaporative cooling, Persians managed to store snow and ice gathered from nearby mountains during winter, and keep it frozen all through summer. But of course, in true Persian fashion, ice wasn't just stored, it was scented. Your host leads you down a gently sloping tunnel into the earth. The air shifts with each step, growing colder, more damp, more still. Inside, the dome opens into a deep pit. It's quiet, and yes, it's filled with stacked, shimmering blocks of ice, each one glistening like a jewel. But the real surprise? The smell? A delicate perfume hovers in the chill. Saffron, cardamom, and something citrusy. Dried orange peel, perhaps. These aromas were traditionally infused into the ice water used for cooling drinks, desserts, and even cloths handed to guests during hot evenings. One attendant is already preparing breakfast. He chips off a chunk of ice and drops it into a copper bowl where saffron threads float in cool rosewater. He stirs. The result? A golden sorbet that glows in the bowl like sunrise in dessert form. You take a bite. Cold, soft, fragrant, like eating a breeze from a garden that only blooms in dreams. And it's not just for pleasure. This was strategy. In ancient Persia, serving flavored snow or scented ice water wasn't just about beating the heat. It was a mark of sophistication, of taste, of care. A host who brought you rose-laced ice didn't just want you to cool down, he wanted you to remember. Here's your quirky tidbit. Nobles sometimes wrapped ice in layers of scented silk before storing it, believing the fabric would teach the ice how to smell. Whether or not it worked is up for debate, but some court records mention citrus snow being served on New Year's Day, and lavender-cooled wine being poured at summer poetry readings. Historians still argue whether these records are poetic exaggerations or literal culinary practices. But one thing's certain, even frozen water had a story to tell in Persia, and that story was told in scent. You wander the Yakhchal's echoing interior a little longer, fingers trailing along the cool, smooth wall. The scent of saffron lingers in your nose, but now it's joined by a floral trace. Violet? You follow your nose to a low shelf where linen cloths soak in violet water. They're used to cool the forehead, placed under pillows, or tucked into collars before stepping back into the sun. You wrap one gently around your neck and feel the temperature drop. Not dramatically, but enough to send a message to your skin. We're okay. We're cared for. As you step back out into the garden, the sun greets you again. But this time, it feels less like a threat and more like a companion. You sip a cup of scented snow water, watching it fog slightly in the morning warmth. Somewhere behind you, the Yakhchal hums with silence, its ice slowly giving itself to the day. And for a moment, you understand what ancient Persians understood. You don't need to fight the heat. You learn to soften it with fragrance, with patience, with ice, and a little bit of saffron. Later that morning, you're invited to visit a nearby villa known for its legendary hospitality. Not for its food, though that's excellent. Not for its gardens, though those are suspiciously lush. No, the real legend is that the family's air smells better than anyone else's in the entire district. Yes, their air has a reputation. You're skeptical at first, until you step through the carved wooden doors and immediately smell it. Something fresh and slightly spicy, with a sweetness you can't quite place. The air feels intentional, as if it got dressed for the occasion. Your host, a gracious matron with silver-threaded hair and a laugh like tinkling glass, nods proudly. "This," she says, "is our guest scent." You raise an eyebrow. She grins. "We have others, one for winter, one for weddings, and one just for annoying cousins." Mainstream historical fact. In many Persian households, especially among the upper and educated classes, olfactory etiquette was as codified as table manners. The scent of a room was considered part of a host's responsibility, and receiving guests without a fragrant welcome could be seen as a subtle insult. The right scent was a mark of refinement. The entrance is lightly dusted with myrrh and bay laurel. The hallway, cool and dim, is lined with little alcoves holding bundles of dried herbs, lavender, mint, and dried lime. The main salon, however, is the masterpiece. There, a bronze burner rests in the center of the room, wafting a curated blend of crushed rose petals, sandalwood, and sweet basil. Around it, tiny bowls filled with citrus peel and saffron lend bright top notes to the air. Here's your delightful fringe detail. Hosts sometimes prepared personalized scent blends for regular guests. If they knew you liked orange blossom and hated musk, they'd adjust accordingly. This wasn't indulgence, it was hospitality. And it wasn't uncommon for a host to send guests home with a small sachet of the scent used during their visit. A parting gift for the soul. You're offered a seat beside a wide, low window that lets in a soft cross breeze. The air brushes your skin like velvet. The scent has shifted again, now touched with a hint of clove. Someone important is arriving, your host says with a playful smirk. We always add clove for prestige. As if on cue, another guest enters and everyone rises. The scent impossibly grows deeper. You wonder how they time it all. Is someone in another room coordinating air like a conductor cues an orchestra? Turns out, yes. Historians still argue whether certain households had designated fragrance stewards, especially in wealthier estates. Some believe it was the domain of women, passed down like secret spice blends. Others suggest that servants were trained in scent duty, just as they were trained to pour tea or arrange carpets. In any case, it was taken seriously. Your host brings out a tray of chilled towels soaked in violet and lemon water. For the forehead, she says, and the manners. You dab your brow, grateful, and inhale deeply. The scent is both soothing and sharp, like someone is telling your brain to calm down with precision. Later, as the visit winds down, you're invited to the fragrance room, a small side chamber filled with labeled pouches, glass vials, clay pots, and folded silks. It's like walking into the wardrobe of a scent-obsessed librarian. There are scent blends for sleep, for sorrow, for love, for courage, even one labeled for avoiding your aunt. That one smells like cumin and indifference. You're handed a small cloth satchel filled with mint, dried cucumber peel, and rose. You'll dream better with this under your pillow, your host promises. And as you step back into the afternoon sun, clutching the fragrant token, the air shifts again. The neighborhood smells of fresh bread and simmering herbs, but it can't quite compete with what clings softly to your clothes. The ghost of hospitality. You think, not for the first time, that the Persians didn't just perfume their bodies. They perfumed experiences, moments, rooms, memories. And as the breeze follows you down the alley, you wonder, what does your air say about you? You end your journey where it all began. Back in the shaded garden beneath the cypress trees, where the wind first greeted you like an old friend wearing a robe of basil and rose. But something is different now. You've walked the Qanats, tasted the ice, sat beneath ceilings that caught heat like traps and released coolness like sighs, and perhaps, most importantly, you've learned that in ancient Persia, the air was never an accident. You lie on a woven mat near the center pool. The water glints under the late afternoon sun, petals drifting slowly in small, lazy circles. You watch a bee land on a mint leaf and linger there, entirely unbothered. A breeze lifts your hair just slightly, and you know that somewhere above, the windcatcher is still doing its work, gathering, guiding, soothing. Your host returns, not with tea this time, but with a fan woven from date palm and reeds, its edges soaked in diluted saffron water. With a smile, he waves it gently, creating a ripple of perfumed wind that rolls over your skin like silk. The scent is new, fresh yet old, a mixture of everything you've encountered. Rose, mint, orange peel, and that haunting trace of sandalwood that always arrives second, like a memory. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. Mainstream historical fact. In the grand tradition of Persian architecture, gardens were often placed as the final experience of the home. A cooling space, a reflective space. Even the geometry of a Persian garden was meant to calm the mind. The quadrants, the symmetry, the sound of water, the scent rising from the hedges. All of it designed to say, you are safe here, you can rest. Here's the last fringe treasure of your trip. Some families, before sleep, would hold a small scent ceremony. Just 5 minutes. A pinch of dried herbs burned gently. A cloth laid across the chest soaked in rose or violet water. A final rinse of the feet with chilled, perfumed water. It wasn't about cleansing, it was a conversation with sleep, an invitation. Historians still argue whether this was a common tradition or a poetic embellishment whispered down through time. But several old diaries mention it, especially among travelers and poets. One scholar wrote, "I lay my head upon the cotton pillow and let the scent guide me from the body." That's what happens now. The garden grows quieter, the birds hush, the shadows stretch, and as your eyes begin to close, your host places a final offering beside you. A sachet of dried linden blossom and bay tied in silk, meant to rest on your chest as you sleep. For courage in dreams, he says. The scent is barely there, but it's enough. You feel the garden fold itself around you, the breeze tracing the path of the wind catcher, the mint cooling your breath, the rosewater rising gently from your own skin. No machines, no screens, no timers. Now just let yourself breathe. In through the nose, slow and soft, and out through the mouth, even slower. You don't need to hold anything. The story's done carrying you. The wind is still here, somewhere in the room. Maybe it's from a fan, maybe it's just memory now. Let it pass over your skin like it did in the garden. Cool. Patient. Quiet. And that scent in your mind, that rose and mint, or maybe jasmine and stone. Let it settle deeper now. Let it rise like the softest part of a dream, the kind that doesn't need to make sense, the kind that knows how to stay. You're lying on smooth stone now, just under a wind catcher that hasn't stopped working for centuries. The air drifts down like a secret. Somewhere, a bowl of water waits with petals floating on its surface. Somewhere, a breeze is still learning how to sing your name. And you're not in ancient Persia anymore, but a part of you is. And it's resting, deeply. Cooled, held, safe. Let the scent fade if it wants to. Let the heat go with it. You're wrapped in calm now, like silk, like sleep, like a home built from perfume and patience. So rest. The wind will keep watch tonight,